You know, after all these years, you'd think I'd have seen it all. You'd think the patterns would become so predictable that nothing could really get under my skin. But every now and then, a family walks onto my stage and the air just changes. It's not about the volume of the yelling or the drama of the accusations. It's about the weight of what's not being said. The silence is what gets you. It's a silence so heavy, it suffocates every person in the room. That was the case with Jenna. When I first read her file, the words were practically jumping off the page, all written in the same ink, out of control, manipulative, lazy, dramatic, a walking disaster. Her mother, Carol, and her older sister, Megan, had painted a picture of a 2-year-old tornado who was tearing through their lives, leaving a trail of chaos and emotional debris. They said she couldn't hold a job, started fights over nothing, and leached off the family's resources with no gratitude. On paper, it was an open and shut case of a spoiled, entitled young adult who needed a serious reality check. The world is full of them. But my gut told me something was off. My gut has been a pretty reliable partner in this business. The problem with labels is that they're a lazy man's diagnosis. You slap a sticker on a problem and you feel like you've solved it. You don't have to look any deeper. You don't have to ask the hard questions. And you certainly don't have to look at your own role in creating the mess. For this family, Jenna was the problem child. She was the identified patient. Their whole narrative, their whole reason for coming to see me was built on that one simple and terribly convenient premise: fix Jenna and you fix our family. I've learned that it's never, ever that simple. When I met them backstage, the dynamic was exactly as I'd pictured it, only more intense. Carol, the mother, had this air of weary martyrdom. She was the long-suffering saint who had done everything for her children and was now being repaid with this chaos. Megan, the older sister, was her lieutenant. She was sharp, articulate, and filled with a righteous anger that felt like it had been simmering for years. Her arms were crossed, her jaw was set. She was ready for a fight. She was ready to present Exhibit A, B, and C against her sister. And then there was Jenna. She was sitting slightly apart from them, hunched over in her chair. She wasn't defiant, not in the way you'd expect from the file. She was vibrating. That's the only word for it. A low-level hum of anxiety and hurt radiated off her. Her eyes darted around the room, never landing on her mother or sister for more than a second. When she did look at them, it was with a flicker of something I recognized all too well, the desperate, pleading look of a child who just wants to be understood. She wasn't a tornado. She was the aftermath. She was the house with the foundation cracked, waiting for the next storm to bring it all down. The family story, as they told it, was straightforward. The father had left when the girls were young. Carol had to work 2, sometimes 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Megan, being the oldest, stepped up. She was the responsible one, the high achiever. Jenna was different. She was sensitive, emotional. As she got older, that sensitivity curdled into what they now called instability. The fight started in her teens, and it only escalated. The most recent blow-up, the one that prompted them to write to the show, was over a job. Jenna had been fired from a waitressing gig, her 3rd job in a year, and the ensuing argument had apparently shaken the walls of their house. They were at the end of their rope. They were talking about kicking her out. But as I listened, I wasn't hearing the story they were telling. I was listening to the gaps, the pauses, the things left unsaid. I asked Carol, tell me about when your husband left. What was that like for you? She gave me the standard answer. It was hard, but you do what you have to do. I had to be strong for my girls. Megan nodded in agreement. Mom was a rock. We all just had to pull together and get through it. Get through it. Those are 3 of the most dangerous words in the English language when it comes to family trauma. It implies you can just step over a massive emotional crater without looking down. But you can't. You either deal with the pain or the pain will deal with you. And in this family, it was clear that no one had dealt with a thing, they had just buried it. But they didn't use a shovel, they used Jenna. I turned to Jenna and asked a simple question. What do you remember from that time? Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. She looked at her mother, then her sister, a silent plea for permission to speak her truth. She swallowed hard and whispered, I just remember everyone being sad and quiet, and Mom was never home. Carol immediately jumped in. I had to work, Jenna. How do you think we kept that roof over our heads? Megan added, we all had it tough. I was basically a co-parent. You don't hear me complaining. And there it was, the family script. Carol is the martyr, Megan is the hero, and Jenna is the ungrateful one who complains. Her feelings were an inconvenience, a disruption to the narrative of a family bravely soldiering on. Her pain was invalidated in real time, right there in my green room. I knew then that the problem wasn't that Jenna was out of control. The problem was that for 10 years, she had been the only one in the family who was actually feeling anything, and it was scaring the hell out of the other two. On stage, under the lights, the dynamic solidified. The audience can feel it, you know. They can feel the tension rolling off a family in waves. Carol and Megan sat ramrod straight, a united front. Jenna was slumped in her chair, physically creating as much distance as the furniture would allow. She was trying to make herself small to disappear. But in a family system like this, the person trying to disappear is often the one holding the entire emotional center. I started with Carol. I wanted to establish the foundation of her worldview. Carol, I said, looking her straight in the eye, you believe you've done everything a mother could possibly do for her children right. Absolutely, Dr. Phil, she said, her voice firm. I worked my fingers to the bone. I put food on the table, clothes on their backs. I sacrificed my own happiness, my own life for them. And I believe her. I believe she did all those things. The currency of her love was labor. It was tangible. You could see the new pair of shoes. You could eat the dinner she put on the table. But the currency of emotional connection is intangible, and that's where she went bankrupt. Did you ever sit down with these girls after their father left and talk about how sad you were, how scared you were, I asked? She looked at me like I'd asked her if she'd taught them how to fly. Of course not, she said, almost offended. Why would I do that? I had to be strong. I couldn't fall apart. Who would have taken care of them if I fell apart? So you taught them that when things get tough, you don't feel it, you just work harder, I stated. It wasn't a question. I turned to Megan. Megan, you were the little adult in the house, weren't you? While your mom was out working, you were the one making sure homework got done, making sure Jenna was okay. A flicker of pride crossed her face. I had to. It's just what you do. You step up, and what did you get in return for that, I asked. She hesitated. I don't know what you mean. I didn't do it for a return. Oh, everybody does everything for a return, Megan. We call it the payoff. You got to be the good one, the responsible one, the one who wasn't causing problems. Your currency was competence. And as long as you were competent, you were safe. You earned your keep. You didn't have to worry about being a burden. But what about the little girl in you who was scared, the one who missed her dad, the one who was maybe angry? She had to be a parent to her own sister. Where did she go? Her tough exterior cracked just for a second. Her jaw trembled. There wasn't time for that, she said, her voice tight. Exactly, I said. There wasn't time for feelings. There was only time for doing. Now let's look at Jenna. I swiveled in my chair to face her. You weren't the provider and you weren't the responsible one. So what was your job in this family? She just shook her head, tears welling up. I don't know. To be the screw up, I guess. No, I said gently. Your job was to feel everything. While your mom was busy being strong and your sister was busy being responsible, you were the one left to carry the emotional baggage for the whole family. You were the only one who was acting like a child who had just lost her father and whose mother was suddenly gone all the time. Your sadness got labeled as drama. Your fear got labeled as anxiety. Your anger at the injustice of it all got labeled as being out of control. This is the core of so many family problems. A child is assigned a role and they play it to perfection because it's the only way they know how to connect and get their needs met, even if it's through negative attention. Jenna's so-called out-of-control behavior wasn't random. It was a direct, predictable result of the emotional starvation in that home. When you're starving, you'll eat anything, even if it's poison. Negative attention is still attention. Let's take the incident with the job. I asked Megan to describe what happened. She called me crying, hysterical. Megan began, her voice dripping with disdain, saying her manager was a jerk and she couldn't take it anymore, so she just walked out in the middle of her shift. She threw away a perfectly good job because someone hurt her feelings. It's pathetic. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I turned to Jenna. Jenna, is that what happened? She took a shaky breath. My manager, he was always making comments about my clothes, about my body. He'd corner me in the kitchen. I told my mom about it a week before, and she just said I needed to be tougher and not be so sensitive. Carol shifted uncomfortably. I thought she was exaggerating. She's always dramatic. So I tried. Jenna continued, her voice breaking. I tried to ignore it. But that day, he trapped me by the walk-in freezer and told me if I wanted to get more hours, I needed to be nicer to him. And I panicked. I felt sick. I ran out. I called Megan because I didn't know what to do. And she just started yelling at me about being irresponsible. The silence on the stage was deafening. The audience got it. This wasn't a story about a lazy girl who quit her job. This was a story about a young woman who was being sexually harassed, who reached out to her family for help and was told her feelings were an inconvenience. She was dismissed, invalidated, and then shamed. Is it any wonder she had an emotional meltdown? I'd be more worried if she hadn't. Her reaction was a perfectly sane response to an insane situation. But in the twisted logic of this family, her panic was the problem, not the harassment. Her pain was the disruption, not the cause of the pain. They weren't just invalidating her, they were erasing her reality. And when you do that to someone long enough, they start to believe they really are crazy. They start to believe they really are the problem. I let that silence hang in the air. On television, silence is supposed to be dead air, the thing producers fear most. But on my stage, silence is where the truth lives. It's the space between the accusations and the defenses where you can finally see things clearly. In that quiet moment, Carol and Megan weren't a mother and sister. They were two people who had just been handed a version of reality so different from their own that their brains couldn't process it. I watched them closely. Carol's face, which had been set in a mask of maternal frustration, began to crumble. Her certainty was draining away, replaced by a flicker of something. Was it guilt? Or was it just the discomfort of being proven wrong in front of millions of people? With narcissistically organized people, you can't always tell the difference. Megan, on the other hand, looked angry. Her defensiveness went up like a shield. She wasn't ready to let go of her narrative. Her identity as the good sister depended on Jenna being the bad sister. I broke the silence, but I kept my voice calm and even. This wasn't the time for yelling. This was the time for a surgical strike. Carol, I said, turning my full attention to her, I want you to look at your daughter. I mean, really look at her. Not the problem child you came here to talk about. Look at the young woman who told you a week before she walked off that job that her boss was making her uncomfortable. She came to you for protection. She came to her mother, and you told her she was being sensitive and dramatic. What do you think she heard when you said that? Carol stammered, I just thought, she always makes a big deal out of everything. I didn't think it was serious. You didn't think, or you didn't want to think I pushed back. Because if it's serious, that requires you to do something. It requires you to get involved, to be a mother in a way that isn't just about paying the bills. It requires you to sit with her uncomfortable feelings. And this family has a rule, doesn't it? An unspoken rule that uncomfortable feelings are not allowed. You buried your grief when your husband left. Megan buried her anger and fear, and you expected Jenna to bury her fear of a predator. But she couldn't. It was too big, so it exploded. And instead of looking at the cause of the explosion, you just got mad about the mess. I saw a tear escape from Carol's eye and trace a path through her makeup. That was real. That wasn't for the camera. That was the first crack in the dam. Then I turned to Megan. And you, Megan, you called her pathetic. That's a word meant to shame. It's a word meant to kill the spirit. Your sister was in a threatening situation, being preyed upon by a man in a position of power. Her fight or flight response kicked in, and she chose flight. A classic trauma response. And you, her big sister, the one who was supposed to be her co-parent, called her pathetic. Is that still the word you would use? Megan's jaw was tight. She's always been like this. She can't handle anything. I've had horrible bosses. You suck it up and you deal with it. You don't just quit and expect everyone else to pick up the pieces. So you're angry, I said. It's not really about this one job, is it? You're angry that for your whole life you've had to be the strong one. You've had to suck it up. And you resent the hell out of the fact that Jenna gets to have the feelings you were never allowed to have. Her tears feel like a luxury you could never afford. So when she cries, you don't see a sister in pain. You see a competitor in the suffering Olympics, and you're angry because you think she's winning. That hit home. Her anger deflated, replaced by a raw, wounded look. It's not fair, she whispered, and the whisper was more powerful than all her shouting. I never got to fall apart. No, you didn't, I agreed, my voice softening. And that's a tragedy. But you are compounding that tragedy by punishing your sister for doing what you were never allowed to do. You've both been victims of the same emotional drought, but you're attacking each other instead of drilling for water. This is what I call the family myth. Every family has one. It's the story they tell themselves about who they are. Their myth was, we are strong survivors who don't have time for feelings. Carol was the stoic provider. Megan was the responsible soldier. The myth worked as long as everyone played their part. But Jenna refused. She wasn't strong or responsible. She was a mess of feelings. She was living, breathing proof that their myth was a lie, and they hated her for it. They weren't mad at her for being out of control. They were mad at her for holding up a mirror to their own unprocessed pain. It was easier to call her crazy than to admit their whole survival strategy was built on a foundation of emotional denial. Let me ask you both a question. I said looking back and forth between mother and older sister, when Jenna came to you about the boss, she was giving you a test. Not consciously, but on a deep psychological level. The little girl inside her was asking, are you there? Do you see me? Am I safe with you? And you both failed the test. Your answer was no. Your feelings are a burden. Deal with it yourself. So she did. She ran. She protected herself because she knew you wouldn't. And then you had the audacity to get mad at her for the way she chose to survive? The truth of that statement hung heavy in the room. Carol was openly crying now, a quiet, shuddering sob of a woman who was seeing her own reflection for the first time in years. Megan was staring at her hands, unable to look at me or her sister. The confrontation was breaking them down, but you have to tear down the faulty structure before you can build something new. This is the pivot point. It's the moment on the show where the energy shifts from accusation to introspection. It's fragile. One wrong word, one defensive retort, and the walls go right back up. My job is to hold that space open, to guide them through the rubble of their old story without letting them retreat into their familiar corners. The blame has been diffused. Now it's about accountability. I focused on Carol first. Her tears were a signal that her defenses were down. Carol, I said, my voice gentle but firm. What do you think it has cost Jenna to be the designated emotional barometer in your family? While you and Megan were numbing out, she was feeling for 3. That's an exhausting job for a child. It's a weight that crushes the spirit. She looked over at Jenna, a genuine, soul-deep look of pain on her face. It was the first time I'd seen her look at her youngest daughter, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who was hurting. I just wanted to protect them, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. I thought if I was strong, they would be strong. I thought if I didn't fall apart, they wouldn't fall apart. But that's not how it works, Carol, I explained. You don't teach children to swim by telling them to avoid the water. You teach them by getting in the water with them. You show them it's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel sad because you're right there to help them navigate it. By hiding your own grief, your own fear, you sent them a powerful message. Feelings are dangerous. They are a weakness. Suppress them at all cost. Megan got the message loud and clear. She became a little soldier. But Jenna couldn't do it. Her wiring is different. She feels things deeply. And instead of recognizing that as a different kind of strength, you labeled it a pathology. You made her the sick one because she didn't conform to the family sickness. I let her absorb that. The word sickness is strong, but it's accurate. Emotional denial is a contagion that spreads through a family system, and they were all infected. I then turned my attention back to Megan. She was still withdrawn, stewing in her own resentment. Anger is often a secondary emotion. It's the bodyguard for hurt and fear. Megan, I said, you told us it wasn't fair that you never got to fall apart. You're right. It wasn't fair. You were cheated out of a piece of your childhood. You had to grow up too fast. And I want to validate that. That's a legitimate loss, a legitimate wound. Her head came up. She was listening. I had acknowledged her pain, which was something she probably hadn't heard in her entire life. But here's the thing. I continued leaning forward. You are now using your wound as a weapon against the one person who isn't your enemy. Every time Jenna has an emotion, you see it as a personal attack, a reminder of what you were denied. Your resentment is a poison, and you're trying to make her drink it. But it's only poisoning you. It's keeping you stuck in the role of the martyr, the long-suffering good daughter. Do you know what the payoff is for that role? You get to be right. You get to feel morally superior. But the cost is connection. The cost is a relationship with your sister. I paused, letting the choice hang in the air. So you have a decision to make. Do you want to be right or do you want to be well? Do you want to keep winning the argument or do you want to have a sister? The confrontation was direct, but it wasn't an attack. It was an invitation. I was inviting her to step out of the role she had been playing for 15 years and consider a new one. It's a terrifying proposition. When your entire identity is built on being the strong one, the thought of being vulnerable can feel like death. Now it was time to bring Jenna back into the conversation. She had been a spectator to this excavation of her family's history, watching as the cornerstones of her identity as the problem were being dismantled. Jenna, I said, and her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted met mine. For years you have been screaming for help in a language your family refused to learn. Your outbursts, your drama, your inability to just cope, all of it has been a desperate attempt to get them to see your pain. You've been setting fires just to get the fire department to show up. She gave a small, sad nod. But here's what you need to understand, I added. That strategy isn't working. It's only reinforcing their narrative that you're out of control. It's giving them the evidence they need to keep dismissing you. You have been reacting to the dysfunction, but that's different from taking control of your own life. You have legitimate grievances, legitimate pain, but you can't wait for them to validate it before you start healing. Your healing cannot be dependent on their apology. This is crucial. The breakthrough for the victim in a family system is realizing they have power, not as a reactor, but as an actor. Their agency isn't in forcing others to change, but in changing their own response. The next time you feel that panic rising, I said the next time you feel dismissed or invalidated, instead of escalating into a fight that you will always lose, you need a new plan. A plan that says, I see that you can't meet me here emotionally. I'm not going to try to force you. I am going to remove myself from the situation and take care of my own feelings. That might mean going for a walk. It might mean calling a therapist. It might mean saying calmly and clearly, I'm not going to have this conversation while I'm being yelled at. It's about setting a boundary, not building a wall. It's about taking responsibility for your own emotional regulation because you've learned the hard way that you can't outsource that job to them. This was the moment of truth. The theory had been laid out, the dynamics had been exposed, the individual roles and responsibilities had been clarified. Now the question was whether they could put it into practice. Could they step off the stage and live differently? The lights, the cameras, the audience, that all creates a bubble of heightened awareness. The real test comes on Tuesday morning when the garbage needs to go out and someone's in a bad mood. Can they remember what they learned, or will they snap back into their old, comfortable, painful dance? The final segment of a show like this is always the most delicate. The deconstruction is done. The raw nerves are exposed. Now you have to give them a path forward. You can't just leave a family in pieces on the stage and say good luck. You have to provide tools, a blueprint for rebuilding. But you also have to be realistic. Decades of ingrained behavior don't vanish in a 90-minute television taping. The goal isn't a miraculous cure, it's a shift in trajectory. If they leave with 1 degree of change in their direction over time, they'll end up in a completely different place. I looked at the 3 of them. The anger was gone. The rigid defensiveness had softened. What was left was a shared exhaustion, and under that, a fragile flicker of hope. They looked like survivors of a storm blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight. So where do we go from here? I asked, posing the question to the room at large. Because talk is cheap. Insight without action is just a conversation. What are you going to do differently when you walk out of this studio and get back in the car together? I started with Carol. Carol, your homework is to learn a new language. The language of feelings. Your old currency of love was providing. It's a good currency, but it's not enough. You need to start paying in the currency of validation. When Jenna or even Megan comes to you with a problem, your first job isn't to solve it. It's not to judge it or minimize it. Your first job is to say, wow, that sounds really hard. Tell me more about that. You don't have to agree with their perception to validate their emotion. You can say, I understand why you would feel that way, even if you wouldn't feel that way yourself. You need to become a safe harbor for your daughter's feelings, not a storm they have to navigate. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I can try. I don't know how. It's not how I was raised. I know, I said. And I'm not judging you for that. You did the best you could with the tools you had. But you came here because those tools aren't working anymore. It's time to get a new toolbox. We're going to arrange for a therapist for you, someone you can talk to just for you, someone to help you unpack your own grief about your husband leaving, about the life you thought you were going to have. You can't give your daughters what you don't have yourself. You need to fill your own well before you can offer anyone else a drink. Then I turned to Megan. Megan, your task is different. Your task is to grieve. You need to grieve the childhood you didn't get. You have been carrying so much resentment because you've been acting as the family accountant, keeping a detailed ledger of who suffered more, who sacrificed more. You need to close that ledger. Forgiving Jenna isn't about letting her off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the hook. It's about putting down the burden of being the good one, the strong one. That role is a cage. We're also going to get you a therapist because you need a place where you can fall apart. You need a space where you can finally be the scared little girl who missed her dad without worrying about who is going to take care of everything. You need to learn that your value is not in what you do for others, it's in who you are. She looked terrified and relieved at the same time. The idea of letting go of that control was probably the scariest thing she'd ever contemplated. Finally, I looked at Jenna. Jenna, your work is about building a strong internal core. For your whole life, you've been looking to your mother and sister for a reflection of who you are. And the reflection they gave you back was broken, dramatic, too much. So you started to believe it. Your job is to stop looking in that mirror. You need to build your own mirror. This means developing a sense of self-worth that is not dependent on their approval. When you get a job, you do it for you, not for them. When you make a decision, you make it because it aligns with your values, not because you're trying to either please them or defy them. Your therapy will focus on boundary setting and emotional regulation. You're going to learn how to soothe your own anxiety, how to handle conflict without escalating or shutting down. You have to become your own best parent. I let that sink in for all three of them. This wasn't about pointing a finger. It was about giving each of them a personal assignment. The family problem could only be solved with individual accountability. It's a paradox. A family gets better when each person stops focusing on the other members and starts focusing on themselves. As we wrapped up, I asked Carol a final question. Looking at Jenna right now, after everything you've heard today, what do you want to say to her? She took a deep, shuddering breath and turned to her daughter. For the first time, she truly looked at her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't see you. I was just so scared, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I let you carry it all. I'm sorry." Jenna began to sob, but it was a different kind of cry. It wasn't the cry of frustration or anger. It was a cry of release. She nodded, unable to speak. Then Megan, hesitating at first, reached out and put her hand on Jenna's arm. "I'm sorry too," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't fair to any of us." It wasn't a Hollywood ending. There were no big dramatic hugs under a swelling orchestral score. It was quiet. It was awkward. It was real. It was two quiet apologies, a tentative touch on the arm. But in the landscape of this family's emotional desert, it was a flood. It was a beginning. I don't know what happened to them after they left the studio. The show provides resources, a plan, a moment of clarity, but ultimately the work is theirs to do. Some families take the opportunity and run with it, creating generational change. Others slip back into their old patterns within a week because the familiar pain is less scary than the unknown challenges of getting healthy. It's a choice. I think about Jenna sometimes. I hope she learned to build that internal mirror to see herself not as the family problem, but as the one who was brave enough to sound the alarm. Sometimes the person who seems the most out of control is actually the sanest one in the room, the one who refuses to pretend that everything is okay when it's anything but. They are the truth tellers. And while it's a painful role to play, they are often the catalyst for healing, the ones who finally force everyone to stop and look at what's broken. I hope she found her peace, whether it was with her family or, if necessary, without them. Because at the end of the day, you can't control them, but you can and you must control you. And sometimes that's where the real victory lies.